Hi, welcome to Really Americans, Really Legal. I am your host today, Chip Franklin. Momentarily, we will be joined by a former federal prosecutor, David Katz, and we'll get into this ruling that says essentially Trump. I say essentially Trump does not have the immunity that he asked for, and most people believe will not get. There's a few things here, and let me best set this up for you by saying this. There's good news, there's bad news, and then there's really bad news. The good news is that again, these charges are solid. Jack Smith has brought them forth, and Trump does not have presidential immunity from prosecution on any of these going back to the 2020 election loss. Of course, we remember the beginning. This is where this all. Of course, Trump claimed he was immune from all of the charges stemming from this, the conspiracy, the actual insurrection itself. And, again, and you forget about the documents, and you forget about Florida, you forget about New York. The insurrection is on most people's minds. And, what's interesting, too, is when you look at this, there's two aspects of this that play out. And the first part is that if in fact the president had immunity, what that would portend for not only Trump, but for Joe Biden right now, right? If a court were to say the president is immune from all crimes, obviously, and Trump has said, that if without the upcoming presidents, and of course, it's never happened before, it won't happen. And, but that's when we get to the bad news. The bad news here is this really isn't about immunity. What this whole court case is about Trump trying to delay this election as long as he possibly can. And that, of course, is, there's a lot of good reasons for this. Trump doesn't want to be tried while he's running for president. There's polling out there now that says it's close to 60% of Republicans say they would not vote for him if he were convicted. So he wants to put this conviction off for as long as he can. This trial was supposed to be in March. That's not going to happen now. And the other part of the delay process is most people think this goes directly to the Supreme Court. It does not go directly to the Supreme Court. Trump can, and probably, I guarantee you he will go to a DC appellate court to try to make this thing go on and on before the Supreme Court hears it. I have no doubt in my mind that the Supreme Court will, in effect, say, no, you do not have immunity. There's no way in my mind that Alito and Thomas would even sign on to that, although we'll see. But then the next part gets even stranger. Just to maybe recap before I get to the really, really bad news here. And again, we're going to be joined momentarily by a former federal prosecutor, David Katz. He is in the LA area, and as you've been listening to the news, the flooding there is terrible. So he just got to his office a minute ago. He'll be with us, and we'll answer these questions. Smith alleges, and the federal government alleges, that Trump's election fraud claims were a pretext just to try to overturn an election, right? I mean, everything that Trump has been saying up to this point was he denied. And now, of course, he's saying that he's immune. And of course, this opens up a whole bag of worms. Is that a good metaphor, or do I just mix them? Let me play you something. This is a little bit from Ari Melber's show on MSNBC, talking about what's actually happening right now and where it's headed. And again, we'll be momentarily joined by David Katz.
It's all Trumpian doublespeak. It's what he does. He says something outrageous, then claims to take a little piece of it back and the like. Ari, forget about what he said about being a dictator for one day. Just think about what, as Andrew and I have been talking about for the last few weeks, what he said his lawyers to out in court to say, which is he, as sitting president, can go and murder his political opponent and face no criminal consequences, and supposedly murder the senators also who would oversee his impeachment trial. That's Putin-esque. It's Soviet. It's certainly not American, but that's the kind of power this guy claims. And you can't just chalk it up to, oh, that was my lawyer, because Trump was asked about whether he stands by it afterwards, and he said absolutely. So given where he is, smells like a dictator, talks like a dictator, walks like a dictator, he's a dictator.
He said, I want to be a dictator, right? All right. So there's another aspect to this, which I call the really, really bad news. And that's if somehow were Trump elected. And, we see these polls go back and forth. I don't believe for a second that Trump is, especially after the summer, if we do get a trial and we hear all this and the American public can hear exactly what happened. And I would assume that Fox News would carry the trial, wouldn't you? I don't know. Anyway, the frightening part of this comes into play is if Trump were somehow elected, and then the trial happened during the process after he were elected and before he was inaugurated, and he was convicted. Would a president-elect be forced to go to jail? I mean, I know this is all insane, right? All right, here's what I want to throw this out to you. If you have questions for David Katz, send him, come on right now here on YouTube and ask the questions. I will ask him again, so you can get your question asked right here. I have a few I want to ask him. He'll join us in just one more second here. This is a good look to it. What would the world look like if, in fact, Trump were president and had this kind of immunity, or if he didn't, would he really ask his own Justice Department to arrest him and to take him in, right?
On Trump's presidential immunity case, whether or not he has the right to do anything he wants as president of the United States, if you're president, how much could the decision impact the second Trump administration if there is one?
A lot. I mean, but it depends on what that ruling is, right? If there is a ruling that presidential immunity doesn't apply here, then there is generally a belief that he is going to have a problem arguing a January 6th case if it goes forward. Should they rule the opposite way and suggest that there's broad immunity, then that's got massive implications for every president going forward. But from this particular president, who has basically said any action a president takes should not be considered within the constraints of the law, that has very specific implications.
How did all this happen, right? How did we become the S-hole country that Trump had mocked back in 2018? Apparently, that's where we are. If you have any comments, I'd love to hear from you while we wait for, again, our really legal. And I'm excited about David Katz is an old friend, and I apologize for him not being here right at the top. That's uncontrollable because of the weather. He's having a tough time. But again, I guess, the idea about corruption and the idea that, as Trump calls this, it's witch hunt. There are some people that feel really uncomfortable in this whole trial and what this would portend. Does this mean that every president that loses will be attacked by the incumbent? Trump has brought up some interesting things that Democrats would never have thought of. The fact that Trump has claimed he is immune from any prosecution and has had his attorney go in and answer questions from a judge about whether or not Trump, with this immunity, would be able to assassinate somebody, and the attorney has said yes, he should not be able to be held if he did this. Now, he said the process should go through the impeachment process, but we've seen this already, right? We've seen that you can't get 60 Republican senators to even the same Republican senators that on January the 6th were texting and decrying this act as being dishonorable and illegal. They would not vote to remove Trump, even with just a few days left in his presidency. So here's the question, and I think it's a really deserving question: if Trump is in fact convicted and while in office, what happens then? Right? What would we do then? Let me say, this is from Mostly Harmless. The world would look like we have three dictators in charge of the world's three superpowers. Overall, it would benefit the smartest dictator. That's one way of looking at it. We'd have Putin, Xi, and Trump. I wonder, how justice would be served and how it would move the closer we get to this election. Would Biden have his Justice Department after, say, he loses in the fall of 2024? Would he then arrest the candidate that just beat him? And if Trump makes it to inauguration, do we really inaugurate a 2 or 3 time convicted felon? Now, of course, the outside of this, the way out in this whole scenario is Georgia. If Georgia were to convict Trump, and that's, I mean, the Fannie Willis thing and all that right now aside, what's going on with her, if Trump were convicted in Georgia, he could not be pardoned by the federal government. He could be pardoned by Kemp or anybody else that became governor in this period of time. But the question really is that if he were found guilty in a state like Georgia, and he was president, what could happen then? Would he? Well, he's not going to give up. He wouldn't. I mean, it is not beyond any comprehension at all of mine that if Trump were somehow elected president in 2024 and was still president in 2028, that he would try to run again. And of course, we have, I believe it's a 25th Amendment, if I'm not mistaken, of the Constitution that, came as a result after Roosevelt's 4 terms. The 4th he didn't complete because he died, but he continued to run and to decry an old precedent set by Washington. You look at this and you ask yourself, is there anything that's off the table right now? Is there anything that is just that you said couldn't happen? Kathy writes, I feel sure that Biden will win. I do too, Kathy. I believe that this is one of those scenarios that is implausible, to say the least. That again, it's not a majority. It doesn't, with the Electoral College, which is of course a ticking time bomb for democracy and has been now. Looking forward, would you ask yourself this question? If in fact that we have a president that doesn't win the popular vote, and only one president in the Republican Party has won the popular vote in 36 years, and that was Bush beating Kerry in 2004. Every other Republican candidate in 2000 and then in 2016, they did not win the popular vote, and the Electoral College put them in office. This is without a doubt, that's what's going to happen this fall. The question is whether or not Trump will get 270 electoral votes. That's a worrisome thing. Let's go to Stevie says, imagine if Hillary, Barack, or Joe even suggested sitting president has blanket immunity, even in passing and joking. Yeah, but it's all off the table now. Trump has changed the narrative that crazy is normal. I mean, have you listened to Huckabee Sanders in Arkansas? The things she's been saying? They're insane. Again, the former press secretary that and daughter of the former governor. John writes, this is definitely the starting point of the end of the Republican GOP maggot party. Trump is all done. He'll be found guilty in all these other cases and more cases coming up against him. Yeah, but what if he wins? How does that play out? I don't know. I really don't know the answer to that. And that's a tough one. Bo writes, had the court decided that the president would be completely immune from original prosecution, would Biden then be free to kill Trump? Or could have killed Hitler before he rose to power? Again, all these questions are played out. You go all the way back to when Trump ran for president, and 17 U.S. intelligence agencies concurred that Russia had interfered with our election. Republicans and Trump in particular called it the Russia hoax. And to this day, they still get away with it. To this day, I hear Republicans say it on talking head Sunday shows about the Russia hoax. And I'm like, have you not followed history and seen that it's exactly what did happen? All right. Anyway, all right. So I promised David Katz would be here, and I'm gonna get to him again. And we do have questions. David is a former federal prosecutor. I've had him on the show before. I'm really happy to have him here. David, thank you for being with us. I appreciate it. I know LA is underwater and you have to go through a few canals to get here. Thank you.
It's my great pleasure being here with you, Chip.
All right. So let's just jump into this and talk about this word immunity. Does anybody, when we say immunity, there's always two questions. One, is there such a thing as absolute immunity? And in this particular case, what would this, if one of these courts had said, and if the Supreme Court maybe should say, however unlikely it is, that Trump has immunity, what does that mean?
Well, there's absolute immunity. Maybe the best example of it is, let's say, for a federal judge. So even after a federal judge retired from the bench, it would be very difficult to bring the federal judge to account for something that they did. But again, if it was within the course and scope of their employment as a judge, if it was for cheating on their taxes, they could be brought into the same trouble as anyone else. They could be indicted by the Department of Justice Tax Division, just like anybody else. Or in Trump's famous example, if they shot somebody on Fifth Avenue, they could be brought to a book for that, right? Held accountable for that after their judgeship if they couldn't be during the judgeship. So there was this whole issue with Trump, whether he could be charged with a crime while he was in the presidency. And remember, that went around and around through the courts. Right. It seemed like it never got decided. But whether that is good law or bad law, whether the Department of Justice's opinion is correct on that or not, from the Nixon era or from the Clinton era, here we are, right? Here we are. Trump is citizen Trump. He's ex-president. So I don't believe there is any grounds for him to claim presidential immunity. And of course, that's what the DC Circuit finally held. It took them a little bit of time, given that it was such an expedited case, Chip, but they did just decide unanimously in a 50-plus page opinion that there is no presidential immunity for Trump. He's citizen Trump, just like a citizen Franklin or citizen Katz at this point.
Okay, so is it possible that this whole thing is a ruse just to delay, that nobody in the Trump camp really expected to get a positive result on immunity? As we know now, and I just was saying before you came here, they can take this case to the DC appellate court, and they probably will because they want to delay this. So it's possible that all these lawyers knew that they would never get this immunity, and that you know, as crazy as Alito and Thomas are, they're not going to vote and create a majority to give Trump immunity. Because, I mean, what would that? I can't even imagine what that would look like. A president that has complete immunity. I mean, didn't Bill Barr kind of argue a little bit for a stronger executive presence? I mean, you can go all the way back to John Adams, right? John Adams wanted the president to be called His Excellency, right? So, I mean, there's a precedent here, but I think this was more about delay tactics. What do you think?
I think it was much more about delay tactics. And when you turn to this issue of what would presidential immunity look like, let's take a case that you could certainly have a moot court argument about in law school. You remember that the number 2 or 3 military official in the Iranian military, really in the Iranian government, he was a very high official. He was essentially assassinated by the president of the United States. Congress did not vote on that. There was no trial in absentia or anything else. If somebody came along and said, look, that violated some law of the United States, that was an assassination ordered by the president. We have a law in this country, a statute against assassinations. And so the argument would be made out, if you had a moot court argument, that here was an example of something which seemed like it might be prosecutable after the president left office. But there would be an argument there that there was presidential immunity. That was purely in the scope of the employment, whether you agreed with it or not. It was an act in defense of or forwarding the United States. Now, this insurrection, the slates, the stealing money, the obstructions of justice by Trump, it's just no way that they're within the course and scope even of what I just said. In other words, you could violently disagree with that action, think that it was something the United States shouldn't have done. But I hope people can see that there would be at least an argument that that was presidential immunity, in a way that this argument now, in my opinion, really is frivolous. And as you say, it's just a time waster, but it's a way in which, you know, highly paid lawyers for Trump have been able to waste at least several months. Now, if this doesn't succeed, let's say the DC Circuit en banc says they won't take it and the US Supreme Court denies cert. The reality is that that trial in Washington, DC on these charges, these federal charges in front of Judge Chutkan, they could go to trial with dispatch. I mean, this case could start picking a jury, could be in late March or April. We might not be that off kilter with it, off the rails.
Yeah, I don't know. Everything I'm hearing, though, David, we're talking to former federal prosecutor David Katz here on Really American, Really Legal. The way it looks right now is that Trump is going to appeal. I think it's a 12-judge panel, I believe, in D.C., 12 judges. And it will appeal to that, and that will take time. And then, of course, he'll lose there, and then he'll appeal again to the Supreme Court. We're looking not March. March is next month, right? And I don't see this. I mean, who's going to expedite this? It's not going to be Trump, and Smith can ask for that. I'm sure he's asking for it right now.
Yep.
But let's say, for example, that the trial starts in, let's say it starts in June. It would not be unheard of a trial like this to last 3 or 4 months, right?
It would not be unheard of, and there is this rule that the administration is not supposed to take acts. The Department of Justice is not supposed to take actions during the last, I think it's 60 days before the election. But Merrick Garland has already announced that this is not covered by that rule. This is not some dispute that the Department of Justice is starting within the 60 days. This is not them going out and arresting an office seeker, right? 3 weeks before the election. It's not, in fact, what Comey did to Hillary Clinton, which was immensely controversial, making this what turned out to be a tempest in a teapot, but making it within just weeks of the election. Merrick Garland, the Attorney General of the United States, has announced that he will not follow that rule. So there's no reason why the trial couldn't end 2 or 3 weeks before the election, which I think is something for the people who are maybe thinking about supporting Nikki Haley, who are more normal Republicans who just want to win the election. They don't really care much if Trump or Haley wins it, but they want to win the election and not have the Democrats in power, might really think that this could be a real roller coaster, and they could end up with Trump in a big dip and the Republicans in a big dip. Roller coasters go each way, and this Trump roller coaster, while it's interesting, may not be in the Republicans' best interest, because they say a lot of people's votes will change if a jury of his peers, even if it's in Washington, D.C., comes back against him. And let me say one more thing about a jury of his peers. You know, Trump always says, I can't get a jury of my peers in New York or Washington. And, you know, he implies that the E. Jean Carroll verdict chip was some runaway feminist who nailed him in New York City. Okay, there were 7 men and 2 women on that jury. I'll say it again, 7 men and 2 women on that New York City jury. They were unanimous against Trump. And I think it will have an impact if the men and the women, the whites and the blacks, all vote against Trump in the jury trial in Washington, D.C. Sorry about that.
Okay. Well, so first of all, again, just the reason there's 9 in a civil trial is different than a criminal trial where there's 12. And as we all know, in a criminal trial, you just need 1 person, you know, to have a hung jury. But I guess the real thing is that I look at this is that, let's say that, just for sake of argument, that this trial starts and it's not over, or it ends in, let's say it ends in August. He has an appeal before sentencing, right? How long will an appeal take in a case like this?
Well, if Trump is reelected in November,
let's say this happens before November. So it's before.
If it happens before November, it's not that he would be remanded to custody. It's not that he would have a final conviction. It would be the impact on voters. And let me say one other thing, too. It was obviously the impact on the populace, which was so critical in the Liz Cheney and Adam Schiff committee, you know, the January 6th committee. So I believe that that impression of it being in the news and playing will have an adverse effect on Trump in the election, just as an adverse effect on the I mean, Trump may have gone up with his base a little bit over January 6th, but in the estimation of the country, in the swing voters, that January 6th committee and the publicized hearings and people waiting for the 10 or 11 days of it hurt Trump. And the trial will hurt Trump if it gets going.
I want to remind everybody, if you have questions for former federal prosecutor David Katz about Trump's legal woes and the latest on these judicial rulings, type it in here and I'll get it to him here on our Really Legal YouTube discussion. But I guess, you know, the thing that you and I, if in fact he is convicted before, and there's a good chance he would be convicted before November the 4th or 5th. And if that is the case, we all assume from the poll you're talking about that Republican support will diminish. But look, we have Nikki Haley, without a doubt, will support him after when she runs out of money, or she, you know, after Super Tuesday. They all have come out and support him. Only 2, Asa Hutchinson and Chris Christie, Liz Cheney, Adam Kinzinger. You know, it was great to see Senator Paul Langford stand up, to, you know, and on this border bill and say, wait a second, you know, we're not here to protect the president. We're here to protect our border, protect our former president. I guess, you know, so let's say that these people don't, let's say that the conviction is enough and that it doesn't work the other way, right? It could easily work the other way. Every time Trump's been indicted, his polling numbers went up. I don't know why conviction is going to change any of that, especially when he's going to come out and say it's still on appeal. And obviously, you didn't answer the question. Will the appeal go past the election? If it does, can you really remove a president-elect? And would so Biden's Justice Department would have to come and arrest a guy who just won the election? I mean, that's a scenario that maybe 10 years ago you would have laughed at, but it's entirely possible now. Is there what are people in legal circles saying about that possibility?
If you can actually imagine that happening, no, I cannot imagine Trump having won the election, Trump having not been kept off the ballot, Trump getting ready to assume the presidency on January 20th, that he would be arrested, let's say, by the lame duck outgoing president on December 15th. No, I cannot imagine that scenario. I also cannot imagine the scenario. One thing that Trump is arguing is that if you have a textual originalist view of the 14th Amendment, it doesn't say an officer can't run for the presidency. It says an officer cannot hold the presidency. So he's made this hyper-technical argument that he can run, he can win the votes, and the only thing that he's barred from doing by the 14th Amendment is holding the office, which would mean that they would have to stop his inauguration on the January 19th before it happened January 20th. That's not going to happen either. If somehow he is allowed to not only run, but to then win the electoral college vote, no one is going to say on January 19th, some special order of the U.S. Supreme Court, that he cannot hold office the next day. Those are all fanciful scenarios, I think, that Trump is trying to put forward in the hope, again, he can buy time, he can bamboozle the public. But I think that the real issue is that I do believe that on that argument that everyone's waiting for this Thursday in the U.S. Supreme Court, which is going to be live streamed and all that kind of thing, I do believe that the Supreme Court will punt. I do not believe there are 5 or 6 votes on the U.S. I don't believe there are 5 votes on the U.S. Supreme Court that says Colorado's a sovereign state. Colorado gave him due process. Colorado kicked him off the ballot, and Colorado can keep him off the ballot. I think one of the cop-outs will be that, that just had to do with the primary. This doesn't really have to do with the general election. Bring us a case that has to do with the general election. And of course, that case regarding the general election, right, Trump against Biden, that will never get to the U.S. Supreme Court and get decided in time. I'm telling you, if you don't want Trump, organize, vote, tell your friends in swing states to go vote.
Okay. Always, but you said, again, let's just go back and remember that of the 535 members of Congress, close to 250, maybe more, of Republicans saw this. Yet still say they would vote for this man and support him in a run for the presidency. So the idea that the scenario I presented is beyond incredulity. I don't think we should gloss over that. Do we have a system set up currently to deal with such a crisis? If Trump is elected and he's facing felony convictions, what do we do?
Well, Chip, I would say that we do have such a system. Merrick Garland, after we all saw that on January 6th, after we saw the run-up, after Biden became president and Merrick Garland, became the attorney general, he could have chosen a special prosecutor right then. And Jack Smith could be more than 2 years ahead of where Jack Smith is right now. And we'd be talking about different things. We might be talking about how Trump delayed things, but I don't think we'd be in this situation. I think that we would have a verdict one way or the other, and I believe the verdict would be guilty in the case in Washington, D.C. I think that he also could have appointed Smith, and that Smith could have brought that case about the purloined documents, the ones that Trump took in Washington, D.C., and that he then kept, even though he got subpoenas from Washington, D.C. I think Smith could have brought that case in Washington, D.C. to a judge who is used to national security issues, Chip, and we would be in the situation now where that case might have gone to trial, whereas it's obvious that with the judge in the Southern District of Florida, it's not going to go to trial. And Smith took 1 in 3 chances that he would get her after she was already reversed twice over rulings that seemed outlandish regarding the search of Mar-a-Lago. So we have a system. Whether the system worked perfectly here is something that historians will look at. But yes, we have a system. And it also may be that Trump could have been charged in some of those states. Now, you see what happened when they try to charge him in those states. It's a true fight. And as Fani Willis can tell you, you not only investigate Trump, but Trump investigates you. But do we have a system that could get somebody who shoots somebody on Fifth Avenue, even though they're president, and who instigates and brings on an insurrection? Yes, we do have such a system.
But Clarence Thomas's wife, Ginny, attended the January 6th. Alito and Thomas, along with the other 4 conservative justices, could play out here, right? I mean, if in fact Trump is elected. If Trump's not elected, then it's all moot, right? I mean, he won't concede, and that's a whole nother 2020 thing. But if Trump somehow gets 270 electoral votes, and you're saying that come January I forget the date, the 9th, is that what it is next year, or 2025? Yeah.
Whatever's the equivalent of January 6th when they certify the votes.
When they certify. States. So on that certification, we would have Mike Johnson. Again, Mike Johnson. He would be the one that's supposed to certify the votes that would support Trump. And Trump maybe is in jail. Do you believe that Mike Johnson has the ability to stand up to MAGA Nation, Kid Rock Nation, as I call it, and say, no, we cannot certify this? And if he does, again, the law says he's supposed to. If Trump is in jail, if somehow we arrest Trump after he's elected, you're saying that Johnson, that in the House of Representatives, that Johnson will be able to have the moral turpitude to stand up to MAGA Nation and stop it? Or, I mean, is he constitutionally capable of stopping Trump from ascending even as a convicted felon?
Well, first of all, if the election is not close, if the Electoral College vote is not close in the swing states, that's the end of it. There's all this mischief, when it's very close. And of course, Trump created much more mischief than anyone else. But if you look at 2024, you know who's going to have Mike Pence's role? Kamala Harris. And all the people who say Mike Pence was a traitor and shouldn't have done what he did, none of them want to say, so Kamala Harris could do the same thing. If she doesn't like the way the cookie crumbles, she can send it back to the state.
Obviously. Right,
but she obviously won't. So I am looking forward to a fair counting of the votes with all, I know I'm a Pollyanna, but with all the things that people rightly are speculating could go wrong. I think if people realize we have a great economy, that Biden is a good centrist president, that he's taking the country in a good direction, that Trump would take us in an awful, terrible direction, not only within the country, but as to both our allies and our enemies around the world. I think that Biden will win handily. And I think we may have another situation like when Obama won in 2008, that there'll be big majorities in the House and the Senate, because the policies that the Republicans are pursuing, in my opinion, are not that popular. Yes, the border is important, but it is not the hugest issue in the world. And I think the way things look right now, all the Republicans want is the problem. They don't want to solve it. They want the propaganda, not a solution.
But polling doesn't back up your optimism right now. You're thinking, however, that a conviction will change that.
And also, Dewey was behind. Obama was behind. It's the people always, right? They rag on the incumbent until they realize it's not the incumbent, as Biden says, against the almighty. It's Biden against the alternative. And the alternative, Trump, drives people to the polls in droves. And I think it will again. Let's hope we have nice weather on Election Day 2024.
So obviously again, and this is something we haven't talked about in a long time, it just takes one vote to hang a trial. I mean, and obviously voir dire is going to be extremely important. If you were prosecuting this and this does go to trial, let's say it goes to trial in best case scenario, June. Wouldn't you say that's best case scenario probably?
Goes to trial? I don't know. The DC trial could start in May. That case in New York City, the one that involves Stormy Daniels, the hush money paid to her, the falsified business records. That one could go to trial first, but I had my real misgivings.
We don't want that going to trial.
I know. Who wants that case going first? That's all we need to trump it a hung jury or even a not guilty. You know, it's all technical. It's also old.
Well, that's
you
a
know,
simple
anybody
majority. I mean, he could lose that case with a majority and not, you know, not a, it doesn't have to be 9 votes, right? So 8 or 9, I don't know what is in New York, but
even a hung jury, it's a criminal case. There'll be 12 jurors, but you know, we say it's for the
right. Okay.
for the prosecution wants everything to go right. A criminal defendant wants anything to go wrong, and that is certainly the hand that Trump's playing. He wants anything to go wrong, including a hung juror. That's good for Trump. I hope that case does not go first. I've always thought the case in Washington, D.C. is the most important and ought to go first. Although the one in the Southern District of Florida is pretty terrible, too. It's pretty black and white that Trump broke the law.
Can Trump pardon himself?
Yes, I believe he could pardon himself, because you have to ask yourself who would overcome that pardon. And no one's ever been able to overcome a pardon as to anybody. You look at some of the people that Trump gave pardons to, some of them went right back to crime. Some of them were violent criminals. And there's nobody around to overturn it. So I think the U.S. Supreme Court would say, no, we're textualist. It doesn't say there's any way. It's one of the unfettered powers of the president. Unless you could prove that he took a bribe, you know, on tape, you could show he took a bribe. Then I guess the president could be charged with bribery, at least according to the opinion, after he or she left office. So no, I believe that he could pardon himself and effectively get away with it. He could also tell the Department of Justice, stop prosecuting that case, and the Department of Justice couldn't defy him. He'd fire one attorney general or acting attorney general after another until nobody appeared in court anymore to prosecute Trump for anything in federal court.
Along those same lines, if Trump were convicted in Georgia and refused to cede to their wishes to show him, could the federal government force him now to actually, literally, could they petition the federal government to bring him into Georgia to face these charges?
Oh, you mean if he were president and never set foot in Georgia?
Right.
I don't think that's how he would get rid of the Georgia state case. I think if he were president of the United States, he would make their lives so unbearable. I think he'd start off with, he would prosecute all of them federally for RICO. He'd find, some attorney in America. You know, he found some attorneys in America who kind of, your jaw dropped some of the things they were willing to do for him when Trump was in office before. He'd find some attorney in the United States who was willing to bring an indictment against Fani Willis and the others for racketeering. He'd have a lot of fun. He'd try to sort of make it right. The mirror image, it would all be a parody of what he would be charged with. They'd be charged with a RICO conspiracy, Fani Willis, the special prosecutor, some of the other ones down there. And it would be, sort of quienes más macho, but it would not be a lot of fun to be a state prosecutor or state lawyer like the special prosecutor and have the full weight of the Justice Department coming down on you. You could say, well, the FBI would never participate in such a charade. I don't know. You remember J. Edgar Hoover?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. It's interesting. I think about this though with the conversations that Barr used to have back when he was in Trump's camp and talk about the power of the executive. It seems to me right now the triangulation of power is in jeopardy moving forward, and the perception is, of course, the old saying, everybody hates Congress except for their congressman, right? There is, the people hold the president in higher esteem than they do Congress and the courts. It's been that way for a long time. And I wonder, you're talking about a guy that has 70 million followers. That makes Jim Jones look like a wimp. This is a scary cult that's in play here. And getting local officials, with voting. We didn't even talk about it. We don't have time to talk about it right now, but it's quite possible some of these states could decide to appoint new electors after the popular vote goes to Biden, and they'll appoint new electors to go to Washington. And I'm not sure that the Supreme Court would tell them they can't do it. So, we could have an election with an electoral victory for Biden that's overturned by red states that decide that they're not happy with that. They don't want these electors voting. I know that Roberts is a big fan of the 10th Amendment as applies to, a state's ability to control their voting apparatus. Let me ask you, that was more of a statement than a question, but I do want to ask you this right now. You're Jack Smith. Today is a good day for Jack Smith?
Because of the DC Circuit decision?
Right.
Oh yeah, this is a great day for him.
Unexpected, right? Nobody really expected that they
Well,
were
you
going
know,
to
it
give
was
him
funny
immunity.
when they expedited the case. I think a lot of people thought at that point, and when they argued it by now weeks ago, I think people thought that there would be a decision by now. You know, you can ask, with the need for speed, why did they have to write a 57-page decision? I think that's how long it was. Why did it take this many weeks? And of course, the other side of it is that this is tremendously expedited for a normal appellate case, but this is such an extraordinary case. And now you have the U.S. Supreme Court. And let me just say, because you asked that question about what happens now, you know, we will all know which judges voted to take this case en banc on the D.C. Circuit, and we'll know when they did so. And a pattern that Trump appointed judges on the D.C. Circuit dragged their feet and took forever to put their cards in, all of which delayed the case, is probably not how they want to be remembered in history. Yeah, one or two of them maybe don't mind being remembered in history that way. My point is that there's a lot of incentive here. If they're really going to take this case en banc to vote right now, yes, we want to take it. But, you know, if they're not going to take it, and there's no reason for them to take it en banc, there's also no reason why we shouldn't have a vote in 2 or 3 days where we take away from that judges appointed by Trump, not appointed by Trump, Democrat or Republican, they said those 3 judges unanimously did a good job, and there's nothing to hear en banc. And then the Supreme Court, it's like, it's your turn now. And the people who say the Supreme Court can't move fast because they remember the Trump tax returns that somehow took over 2 years for the U.S. Supreme Court to litigate, we should also look back on 2 cases. One of them is Bush v. Gore. Suddenly in Bush v. Gore, they could decide that case within days. And we should also look back at the Nixon case. The Nixon case was one that the U.S. Supreme Court, Nixon and the tapes back in the 70s, they decided that within weeks. So if the Supreme Court takes forever and this kicks into the end of the year or 2025, people will fairly say the U.S. Supreme Court knows how to move a case and they know how to slow down a case. And for Trump, they slowed down Trump's case. So you may be very surprised that this case lands. I guess you would be very surprised, a lot of your listeners, that this case does end up back in front of Chutkan and she's picking a jury in the spring. Could happen.
Could happen. I'm laughing because I remembered a Trump comment. I have it on tape somewhere in my archives of Trump talking about these Latin phrases when you said en banc. I think that's Latin, right? And he said, he goes, I don't want that. I don't think we should be speaking Latin anymore.
It may be
Anyway.
Francais. It may be Francais, right?
Francais. I want to say this though, and I just for everybody that, you know, and people are right. A great day. I'm getting a lot of this. A great day for the USA with Trump's appeal getting denied, but Trump didn't get his. Yeah, but look, no, this was never going to happen. He was never going to be given immunity. Okay, just so people understand that this is all about delay. All this is about Trump's legal team trying to delay this trial to get it closer to the election with the hope that, as you mentioned, that 60-day window would be open to them to stop this until after the election. And I guess there's a real possibility, and everybody has to acknowledge this. In fact, the numbers themselves call it almost a coin toss, whether or not Trump would be elected again. And if Trump were elected and had convictions or was facing convictions and facing incarceration, we would have, and you have to agree to this, a constitutional crisis in this country about putting a sitting president in prison. He's not going to resign. We're not going to get the Barry Goldwaters of the Republican Party walking up to the White House like they did in 1974, telling Nixon, you should leave for the country. None of that crap's going to happen because he's a sociopath, David. He is a dangerous sociopath who would melt this country down to save his ass. And that's why I'm not as optimistic today and as happy as many people are. My wife saw the news while we were watching the Today Show this morning, and she said, wow. And I'm like, I hate to be Debbie Downer, but I just think that, there's a long way to go here. You got to agree with that, right?
I think that, even for the Republican agenda, I've always been surprised at Trump. First of all, he does some things which are definitely not the normal Republican agenda, Republican philosophy. That's the first thing. And the second thing, people always said, stand up to China. The minute that China gives Ivanka some licenses that she wants in China, he'll roll over. If the people who like his message, why don't they get that he's the wrong messenger? People really think he's going to stand up to China. Remember he said he was going to build a wall and make Mexico pay for it. There were ways to get Mexico to do a lot more to stem illegal migration into the United States. What did he do? What did he do? Where was the deal where he said, I'm going to tax the remittances sent by Mexicans living in the United States back to Mexico for our border security? When did he do those things? He separated families and did all these toxic things. But, you know, he deported fewer people than Obama. People don't like to remember that Obama was called the deporter in chief, Chip. He deported more people, you can look it up, than Obama did. Why? He was trying to get the Republicans to see some good faith on his side so they would make a global immigration deal. And now there's a global immigration deal, Chip, which is on the table, which does not have a pathway to citizenship. All it is.
Oh, and it got rid of catch and release. It got rid of people staying in the country while they wait for their asylum. They're all in detention during. No, it's a Republican bill.
It's a Republican bill.
Yeah. No, I get it.
Focused on border security, and guess what? They want the issue and the propaganda. They don't want to do something, the Republicans, about the border. It's stunning. You remember President Reagan had an amnesty. And I think the amnesty worked out well. A lot of those people are living here now. Their kids are living here. They're contributing to American society. You tell these Trumpsters, Reagan, you know, he talked the talk, he walked the walk, but he also realized that amnesty was a good idea at that time. They look at you like you're crazy.
Well, I guess you know, when all this is over, we're going to have to look back and, you know, I mean, Jefferson wanted to tear the Constitution up every 5 years. You know, I think that a constitutional convention is in order, but I don't think it's going to happen in our lifetimes. I just don't think there's enough bipartisanship to bring together a really solid and you know, empirical look at what needs to be done in our Constitution. And I think one of the things that, you know, I would be willing to revisit the 14th Amendment's, you know, quote unquote anchor baby thing, and to talk about all these things that Republicans have. You know, like we do need a border that we can control, but, you know, one side is engaged in hyperbole and lies about terrorists, you know. And I love it when people always say, you know, when Trump was saying all the terrorists are all here, you know, and they come across the border, and I'm like, really? Here's the terrorist. They didn't come from Mexico. Anyway.
Watch out for the constitutional conventions. They might have a lot to say about the First Amendment, the Fourth, the Fifth, the Sixth Amendment. I really would not.
You can't defend them. You don't deserve them.
Wow, I would not relish that constitutional convention. I think it would be full of a lot of whack jobs, and the lobbyists would control it. The lobbyists would control it. The impact of money on it. So,
Citizens United. How are you going to get rid of Citizens United? Citizens United is at the heart of all the things you just mentioned.
Elect Democratic presidents and have them get a few picks on the Supreme Court. That one's hanging maybe 6-3. If, you know, I've always said that we should expand the number of justices on the Supreme Court. To-be senator, in my opinion, Adam Schiff agrees with me. He's a moderate, but there just has to be something. Unless people want to live for decades under a 6-3 Supreme Court, striking down environmental regulations, doing things like Dobbs, doing things like the gun proliferation laws that they find in the name of the Second Amendment. Unless people want to live under that regime, we have a right, just by vote, not by constitutional amendment, not by having a convention. The people have a right to vote to have more justices on the Supreme Court. We could have 11, we could have 13. People say, well, they'll do that right back to the Democrats when they have more power to do it. You know what? Unless you want to have this nine for many more years, you have to consider having 11 or 13 members on the U.S. Supreme Court, as Adam Schiff agrees with me. Okay.
Well, I believe that, you know, what we can already do something now with just an act of Congress. We can rotate them. You know, the Supreme Court members aren't guaranteed lifetime on the Supreme Court. They're just guaranteed lifetime as a federal judge. We have the ability to rotate them and to move people in and out. So we can do that without amending the Constitution. We can do it next week.
That's a really rough one, boy. I'm not sure that one stands up. I'm not sure.
Oh, no. It's in the Constitution.
By simple legislation, you tell Alito and Thomas, thank you for your service. Now you're on some circuit, and there's 2 new openings on the Supreme Court. I don't think there are 2 new openings on the Supreme Court.
No, you don't have to have something.
Thomas, you're going to serve on the circuit court. I'd want to look that one up, Chip. That's all I want to say.
No, it's true. It's true. I mean, okay. I can't believe I know, but I mean, it's one of those moments. I looked at exhaustively through that process. We do have another way other than a constitutional amendment to expand the members of the Supreme Court. Well, actually, we don't need a we don't need a constitutional amendment. We can add as many as we want with a majority of Congress, right?
If it's that simple, Alito and Thomas can be told that they have to serve on the circuit court, and Chip, you and I go on the Supreme Court.
All right,
I'm ready to serve. Take care, man.
I think your optimism is welcome in this group here. I know that, especially when we look at the poll numbers that, that show that's this close, and all of us look at the country and go, what the hell are these people thinking? And it's really, it's mind blowing. Well, I know what it is. They only watch Fox News, OAN, and Newsmax, and they don't know. If that's all you watch, then, then Biden is burning the country down while chasing 3-year-old kids through the park. If that's what if that's all you're taking in, and I'd much rather see somebody else running right now than Biden, although I think he's done a great job. I just think the optics are, we're going to have to deal with that in the fall. 6 months from now, it sounds like you think you'll be happy.
I think I'll be happy, and in many ways, including politically. But people need to talk to their friends and contact their friends in the swing states, and they need to organize and they need to vote. It doesn't happen by waiting for the courts. I've said that for years and years, including on your old show on the station that shall not be named.
Oh, KGO. Yeah, they burned themselves down. It's crazy.
I got to run, man. It's so great to be with you, Chip.
David, it's always great to be with you. Let's do it again soon, okay?
My pleasure. Take care.
Right. Again, that's former federal prosecutor David Katz, nice enough to join us and talk about, obviously what this appellate court said today. Again, it's exciting, but this is not really what it's about. It's not about immunity. It's about delay tactics. It's about getting this election as close as possible to Trump's trial, and Trump trying to use that as a way of saying that he has been not being denied his opportunity to run. Wow. Yeah. David Katz, that's Katz at David Katz on social media. All right. Let me run through a couple of these questions here. And this is Justice Thomas is compromised. Yeah, of course. But how are we going to get him out? How are you going to get Justice Thomas out? I mean, the guy is as compromised as somebody could be. I mean, he's taken gifts and monies from Republican donors who have who have pushed him to make decisions that work against the majority of Americans simply because of these rich people that he hangs with. That's not the way it's supposed to be. Stuffed. Is that the, he recommends Andrew Seidel's book on expanding the Supreme Court. Yeah, I mean, the Congress should have a lot more than 435 members. It's, the original, I want to say the original congressional district was meant to have hundreds, not tens of thousands. So that one's messed up as well. Brett writes, the conservatives are utilizing UFO popularity to obtain extra whack votes, and that's even scarier. People promoting Trump knows about UFOs. SU not. I believe that every part of it. Let's again. Thank you, Gigi. I appreciate it. We'll be doing this more as we come up. Again, be sure to like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel to help support Really American Media through the election. We will go after Republicans, and we will make sure that that if we somehow don't succeed in the fall and the protection of our Bill of Rights and our Constitution from Trump and his sociopaths, what else can you call them, then it won't be for lack of effort. It won't be. And one more here is Clarence Thomas and Judge Cannon are the most banana republic thing in the United States right now. Yes, we have become the S-hole country that Trump once referred to. And boy, we have time to fix it, right? All right. Again, please subscribe and like and check out this YouTube. Every day we'll be putting up more commentary, and we're expanding that with Really American Media. I am Chip Franklin at Chip Franklin. We'll see you soon. Thank you so much. Till next time.